Hi guys, today we're talking about a Canon EOS Rebel G. This cost $14.61 from Goodwill. When they were new, they were 59,000 yen, which was $546. The value on eBay for one like this one in good condition is about $40. The personal significance to me on this camera is it's a lot like a DSLR that uses film. If you didn't open the back and realize there's film in there, you'd think you've got a digital single lens reflex. These were made from 1996 to 1999. Its features are it's very light, all plastic, including the lens. It has 3 autofocus points and they're selectable or automatic. It's available in silver or black. The shutter speeds go from 30 seconds to 1/2000th of a second at half stops. Plus it has a bulb mode. It shoots at 1 frame per second in continuous mode and has a built-in flash. On the camera top, we have this command dial on the left, and I'll just point out now that you need to be in the lock position, which is a red L, to turn the battery on and off. That's the power to the camera. There's no on-off switch anyplace. There's a film plane indicator. In case you're doing macro work, you could measure from that indicator to your object and know the exact distance to the film plane. It has a hot shoe and a built-in flash. The flash won't pop up unless the camera's turned on, and you depress this flash button on the side. This little button here is the focus point selector. It shows 3 dots to mimic the 3 focus points that are spread across the viewfinder window when you look through the viewfinder. This is the function button. We'll talk about that later. And this is the self timer and the film rewind button. There's an LCD panel that displays many of the normal things you would expect. This is the main dial for controlling things, and this is the shutter button. On the camera bottom, we have a tripod, a standard 1/4x20 tripod socket, and a battery compartment cover, which is easy to open. I'll take one battery out just to show it. Whichever one wants to fall out. It uses 2 CR123 lithium batteries. These are 3 volts and they're very expensive. They're about $7 on Amazon for 2 of them. I'll leave a link below the video where you can get to Amazon and find those 2 batteries if you need them. On the camera front, we have this flash button. Again, if the camera's on and you press that button, it opens the flash. We have a lens release button, and it works quite simply. You just press it and rotate the lens counterclockwise. Pops right off, and you align the 2 red dots to insert it and go clockwise. It's not a 90-degree cycle. It's probably 75 or 80 degrees that you turn the lens. And then this window is the autofocus assist light, or the red eye reduction light, or the self timer light. And I haven't did a self timer with it. Let me try it. We're turned on in P mode. I'll push the button, and then so now it's counting down. Okay, the lens on this particular version of the Canon EOS Rebel G is a 35mm to 80mm zoom, and it doesn't turn very far to do that zooming. And you notice that the minimum length of the lens is not at one of the limits. It's right around 50mm. So if you wanted to fit it in a smaller case, you don't jam it one way or the other, you find 50mm. This is the zoom ring, and this is the focus ring. And this is the switch for autofocus or manual focus. On the right side, we have a strap lug and a little plug for the remote control jack, and it takes an RS60E3 remote, and I'm sure lots of third-party vendors make an inexpensive remote you can buy for about 10 bucks. That'll fit in there. I don't want to lose that plug. On the left side we have the other strap plug and a little lever or button that you can push up to open the camera back. And the only thing really interesting inside the camera back, interesting to me, was that this is the first 35mm film camera I've ever seen that doesn't have any sprockets to advance the film. It's all done with this knob on the right where you wind the film onto. I'm curious to see if that works. On the camera back, we have the viewfinder window. This window is called the film identification window, so you can see when you have film in it what type you put in it. This is the auto exposure lock, and if you half press to get an exposure setting and then push that button, it'll lock that exposure setting in, but it'll only hold it for 4 seconds unless you keep your thumb on the button. And then the same button, if you have the flash up, is the flash exposure lock, and again you can lock in the flash exposure setting by holding that button down, or if you let go it'll remember for 16 seconds in a flash exposure. The last button up here is the exposure compensation button / aperture button. So when you're in modes like shutter priority or aperture priority or even program mode, you can push that in and then the command dial will change the exposure, and you can see the exposure going here from normal exposure in the middle to -1 EB, -1.5, and -2 EB. So it has a range of plus or minus 2 exposure values, and that was in P mode. Now if I was in TV mode and I'm set at 125th of a second, if I do this and it's changing that, what it's really changing then is the f-stop, because it can't change the film speed. And in manual mode, that button changes a little bit, because in manual mode, then it just switches the main dial between shutter speed and f-stop. So here we are in manual. The shutter speed right now is 125th. That's 1/45th of a second. That's 350th of a second. If I hold this button down, we're at f5.6, but now we're at 4.5. If I go the other way, at 6.7, f8, f9, and so on. When in doubt, set it to f8 and 125th and go take pictures all day. Now let's talk about this command dial, because it's pretty complex for what should be a simple camera. I mean, it is a film camera after all. So the first zone here from P all the way up to the automatic depth of field is considered the creative zone. And P mode, the camera automatically sets the shutter speed and the f-stop based on conditions. You can override it with exposure compensation, so if I half press the shutter, it's selecting a 15th of a second at f4.5, and then if I hold the exposure compensation down, I can change the shutter speed. Now if I go into TV mode, that's time value, that's Canon's way of saying shutter priority. Then I have the shutter set at 125th of a second, and I can set it manually to whatever I want, but I set it to 125th. And if I go into exposure compensation, and it's changing the exposure value down here, what it's really doing, of course, is changing the f-stop. And then it's the opposite in aperture value setting, which is aperture priority. So now my aperture is set at f8. I could change it here, so we'll leave it at f8, and if I hold this down and change it, you can see that the exposure compensation is changing, but of course what it's actually changing is the shutter speed. And then finally there's manual, which we looked at before. This is automatic depth of field. And what happens here is when you frame your picture and you half press the shutter like that and get a focus, you see it shows two dots. It's selected 2 points that it focused on. One point will be the minimum focus and the other point will be the maximum focus. Now it's not going to take multiple exposures to do exposure or focus bracketing. What it's going to do is take one picture, but it's going to adjust the f-stop so that theoretically those 2 focus points are included in the that depth of field map. And then out of the creative mode into the function set zone, there's ISO. Now you might wonder, why would you have an ISO setting on a film camera? Well, only DX code film has the special connectors, well, I shouldn't say connectors, the special coding on them that can be sensed by the camera sensors with the electronic contacts to tell you the ISO setting. If you have a film that doesn't have that on it, then you go into this and you can manually set your ISO. So right now I have it set at 400 and there's no film in this camera, so it believes me. And finally, this last one is called the mid-roll film rewind. So in theory, if I had film in it and I had taken 10 pictures and I wanted to take that film out and develop it, I just put it in that position and then hold down the rewind button, which is here, and it would in fact rewind what's in the film. But there's no film in this camera, so it won't do it for me. Okay, now we'll go to the other side of the dial, which Canon calls the programmed image control zone. So the first selection is this green rectangle. That's in fully automatic mode. So when you do that, the main dial doesn't do anything anymore. So you just focus, do an automatic focus. In this case, it popped up the flash and it's going to take a picture. And it's not going to give you a choice of any selections or settings. You can't even change the focus points. It's all automatic. The picture of the face, of course, is for portrait mode, and what it does in portrait mode is it selects the maximum aperture based on the light sensor and what it's capable of doing. And in this particular lens only goes down to f4, so I'm sure it'll select f4 and then automatically select the shutter speed to match. The next symbol is a mountain, and that's for landscape mode, in which case it wants you to zoom to a wide angle and it'll set a very slow shutter speed. It'll determine the shutter speed based on the light conditions, and that wants you to put it on a tripod. So it could probably select a very slow shutter speed, even at night. And then there's a macro mode. Most people don't understand what macro mode does on point and shoot cameras, and on this case on this film camera, or even on a digital SLR. When you're not in macro mode and you're taking a picture through a window, you see a rabbit outside, you want to take a picture of that rabbit. What you don't want is for the camera to focus on the dust on the window. And the way you focus on the rabbit and not on the dust or the speck of dirt on the window is by not being in macro mode. That forces the camera to change the minimum focus distance that it recognizes when it does autofocus. When you're in macro mode, then it allows the camera to focus as close as the lens is capable of. And in this case, on this one, it's about 6 or 8 inches that it can focus. It can focus really close. And of course, when you think macro and you want to get the picture as large as you can of the object, like a bug, in most cases, and in the case of this lens, you get that close by actually zooming all the way out and then going in as close as you can to take a picture. And right now, it could focus. That's about 1 foot away. It could focus about 6 or 8 inches away. And it couldn't focus any closer than that. So it can focus pretty darn close. Okay, the next mode is sports mode, and that adjusts the maximum shutter speed that it can, giving the conditions, and that would be the amount of light you have. and the film speed. And then lastly, it has a night scene mode, and that's very close to landscape mode. It's going to take a really long exposure, and they want you to put it on a tripod, but it's going to limit the shutter speed to some reasonable value because they do advertise that you want people in the picture. They're assuming you're doing pictures with people, and you're going to ask them to stand still. So I'm guessing it's probably a 20th of a second or something like that. And again, it depends on the light conditions. So now let's talk about this function button. This is where you get at all these functions that are permanently labeled on the side of the LCD screen. So I'll turn it on to P mode. So if we press the function button, it looked to red eye reduction setting, and it's showing a 0. If we turn the dial, we can set it to 1 or 0. 0 means red eye, automatic red eye reduction is turned off, and 1 would turn it on. So I'll leave that off for now. If we press the function button again, it goes down to the microphone or the speaker symbol, and that's for setting the beep on the shutter on the focus acquisition. So when I focus, it beeps like that. But if I turn that to a 0, now if I focus, it just focused and took the picture. It didn't beep. Now if you were looking through the viewfinder, you can see the little dot that would show you that it has focused. I'm going to turn that back to turn the beep on. And then the next mode is multiple exposure. So in this mode, there is no 0. I have to get that back. The minimum you can set it to is 1. So that means that when you're in a 1, that's really saying that multiple exposure mode is turned off. So the camera won't accidentally take any double exposures. It'll always advance the film after every picture you take. However, if I change that to 2, 3, 4, and it'll go all the way up to 9. So you could take 9 pictures without advancing the film. So if I set it for some smaller value like 5, I'm in P mode. If I take a picture, the counter goes down to 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you take the last picture, the counter is missing, so now it's back in normal mode. So that would have not been advancing the film until the end. And finally, a function that if I had this camera, I would probably use is auto exposure bracketing. And especially in the film days, some of the film formulas were not very, they didn't have a lot of latitude. So when you didn't get your exposure dead on, you were probably horribly underexposed or horribly overexposed, and it was a mess. So you really had to get the exposure right. So when you want to make sure you get the picture, you want to use auto exposure bracketing. It's not the reason we use auto exposure bracketing today. Today we use it so that we can create high HDR pictures by combining them afterwards in software. But remember, this is film. So what happens when you're in auto exposure bracketing is you get this display. 0, 0 means there are no brackets, and then if you change the dial, 0.5 means we're going to take 3 pictures, a half a f-stop apart, a half an exposure value apart. There'll be shutter speed, they won't use the f-stop. And if I dial it, we can go 1 exposure apart, 1.5, and here we're 2 exposure values in each direction, so it'll take 3 pictures. The first one it will take at the normal exposure, the second picture it will take 2 stops under, and the third exposure it takes will be 2 stops over. And you can see that happen in the viewfinder. If you hold the button down, it'll take the 3 shots, not too quick. Again, 1 second per shot is as fast as this camera can go. But if you take them one at a time, you can see the settings it chooses. So I'll put this down, and we're at, I can't read it in the dark, 1/10 of a second at f5.6. Now we're at a 45th of a second at 5.6. And now we're at a third of a second at 5.6. And we're still in that mode. And so you have to get out of that mode or you'll be doing this every time you take pictures. So you have to go into the function thing and set it back to 0 to get out of auto exposure bracketing mode. Pretty cool. So now let's talk about what you see in the viewfinder. And I have to just tell you that because it's difficult to show or difficult to get on a picture of it. There's 3 focus points across the middle of the screen, and they're covering about a third of the image, and they're always there and they don't change no matter what you have setting for focus points here. But if you set your focus points, say to the left focus point, then if you look through the viewfinder at the bottom of the screen, it'll show you that the left focus point is the one you've manually selected to use. And by the same token, whatever you change here would be reflected in the window at the bottom. Whoops, wrong button. But if we select all 3, then when you look through the viewfinder, you'll see all 3 are selected. But when you press the button and actually focus on one of those points, then it will show you at the bottom of the viewfinder which one of those the camera picked. In this case, I half pressed the shutter button and it picked the focus point on the right. And also at the bottom of the screen, there's all kinds of other indicators. There's an auto exposure lock indicator. There's a flash ready indicator, which those 2 are normally turned off. There's a high-speed flash indicator, which would be normally off. Probably only works when you get a more sophisticated flash. This takes all of the new high sophisticated Canon flashes. And then there's shutter speed and f-stop. They'll always show you that. And then there's a focus point indicator, a big green dot on the right that you can see. There's an exposure graph that shows a chart much like the one that's on the front here. So if I was in TV mode and did exposure compensation, you can see how my indicator moves back and forth here. Well, in the viewfinder, if you're in that mode and you do that, you'd see it dancing on the bottom of your frame the very same way. You'd see whether you're correctly exposed in terms of exposure compensation or not. And even if you just do the main dial, you'd see what it's selecting there, but you'd also see that it's whether you're within the exposure triangle or not. And then there's a red eye indicator, which I haven't seen because I haven't been playing with the red eye thing. So this is a pretty complex camera, and I highly suggest that if you get one of these cameras or you have one and you're going to start using it and take some film pictures, and film's not cheap, that you download the manual. I'll leave a link to the manual below the video so you can get a free one off the internet. So now let's see if we can load a roll of film in it and take some pictures. And I've never done this, so let's cross our fingers. So we're truly going to do this by ear, by feel. I don't know which side of the hole it's supposed to go on. Let's just close it and see what happens. Now you see what it's theoretically doing is winding the film all the way to the end, and it stopped at 24. So it must have sensed that there were 24 pictures on that roll, and it's going to count down as I take pictures. So now we're at 23, 22. That's pretty cool. So now if I wanted to rewind this, I could just click the rewind button, I think. And I want to say it's not doing anything because I haven't gotten to the end of the roll of film. Or I could go to this mid-roll rewind and try that. And see, he's trying to wind it back. I don't want it to go all into the case, so I'm going to try and shut it off. It won't let me. So it wound it all into the case. Well, wasn't that fun? Now there's a roll of film that I'll have to dig it back out of the case if I want to dim wood again, which is hard to do, but they make tools to do that. Alright guys, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. This is a great little camera. If you have one and you want to take film pictures, I think it's a good thing to carry around. Nice and lightweight, by all accounts, takes really good pictures.